Flock cameras have gone from a relatively obscure police tech to a national privacy fight almost overnight. And the argument isn't really about whether cops can see your license plate. Of course they can, they've been doing it for decades. But here's the thing: seeing you once is a very different proposition from building a searchable database, a searchable history of everywhere your car has been. That's the subtlety that turns a camera into a surveillance system. It may help recover stolen cars. It may also track millions of people suspected of absolutely nothing. So, where does public safety end and the surveillance state begin? Today, we're looking at flock safety surveillance and who gets to draw that line that protects our civil liberties. And here to help me decide what that line is, none other than my friend, co host, candidate for the GOP VP nomination, and I may add, pertinent to this conversation, former police officer, Mr. Mike Termott. Mike, how are you doing today? That was a long introduction for you. I hope you
Yeah,
don't.
that was too long. That was, about 5 times longer than I deserve. I think what I deserve is and Mike is here too. Okay, let's get into it. I
And
I think that would be
here's
sufficient.
here's Mike.
Well, even that might be an overstatement. John, I thought you set it up, really well. Yeah, as a matter of full disclosure, I hadn't really, thought about making a disclosure until you just, prompted me to think this through. As a matter of full disclosure, I have worked for a city as a police officer and as a training officer. We did have access to cameras. Um, Not only did we have cameras in our town, but we had access to cameras by agreement with other agencies in Broward County, right? And as for some reason, it doesn't come up too often in this conversation, but without the cameras, police officers are always typing in license plates into their computer as you go down the street. Every local cop, myself included, gets good at driving with your left hand and typing license plates with your right hand. Yeah, I'm not suggesting that's all that safe. We do teach cops to do it, which is probably now that I think about it, 15 years later, it's probably not a great idea. But we teach cops to multitask in general, and one of the things that you're asked to do is to type in license plates. And the reason I think that this is not completely irrelevant is because you're not typing in license plates based on, oh, this guy just broke the law, right? You're typing in license plates because you're bored, right? Cops type in license plates because they have too much time on their hands and they're trying to, and better than just sitting behind the Walmart and reading the newspaper, or metaphorically reading the newspaper, of course. Better than that, at least you're doing something productive for which the city is paying you, and the city expects you to do this. We used to ride up and down Hallandale Beach Boulevard between I 95 and the beach. Everyone you could see, you would type in their license plate to make sure that their insurance was up to date, make sure there wasn't a warrant out for the arrest of the owner of the vehicle, right? Make sure the vehicle wasn't stolen, something like this. But you don't have any particular suspicion about a vehicle. You're just typing it in because you can see it. So in some sense, you are a fairly automated license plate reader, right? You're not a machine, but not much more thinking goes into it than goes into the uh, machine's non-discriminatory way of sucking up license plates. And by the way, we did not have them at the time at the agency where I worked, but plenty of other agencies were getting license plate readers attached to their vehicles. And by the way, it's not just cops. I have heard that there are tow companies with license plate readers so that they would find vehicles that had to be towed And so they would make a buck by notifying their local agencies.
Sure, well, it's also like the scuff law, the guys who have unpaid tickets and things like that, that you would do. But I think, like, you've kind of already kinda hit on an issue that plays into this. So, just to take half a step back, right? So you've got flock safety, or as you commonly hear referred to in the news and online, just flock cameras. And just to let folks know, these are the ones that you see, they're kinda like rectangular shaped or at an angle. You see them on the highway in your local streets. And
And all too often, you don't see them.
all too often you don't see.
Doesn't matter what they look like. They see you, you don't see them.
Right, and I think it's worth just sort of saying what they do, right? So, initially, when you think about license plate readers, the first thing that comes into mind is those red light cameras, right? That if you run the red light or you make a left turn against the light, blah, 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 they kinda read your license plate and you get one of those. In New York, it might be a $75 ticket in the mail that says, like, you ran a red light. The other one, it would be for speeding, if on the highway or whatever, boom. And those have already been tried. There's always some genius that says, "I want to face my accuser, my Fourth Amendment right, my Sixth Amendment rights in court," and the judge will say, "Stop it," and pay the fine, and you're done, right? So that's all kind of been litigated in terms of those point in time sort of infractions, right? You ran
Or prove who's driving
or proof
types
of
of
driving.
issues,
Right,
right?
right. But it's the type of thing, like an incident occurred where there was a misdemeanor or a crime, generally speaking, and they'll say,
Or
"Oh,
just an infraction.
an infraction. Here's the picture. Here's who done it. Here's who was driving." And even though it can be annoying, you kind of say to yourself, "All right, you know, what's the difference between that and a police officer being there either with a camera or providing eyewitness testimony that so and so ran the red light?" What Flock cameras and other vendors like Flock, because Flock isn't the only one, what they do is they start collecting this data that's not just at red light cameras, that's not just on the highway to catch speeding, right? They just start randomly and like a vacuum sucking up data, right? Like
Right.
they read everyone's license plate, whether they've committed an infraction or not.
By the tens of thousands per hour.
Nonstop. It's like that. There was a TV show a couple of years ago on CBS that did this. I forget the name of it now, but it was like, this supercomputer reading everybody's movements and everything. And that sort of dystopian thing from 10 years ago is reality now, right?
Right.
So
And when you consider nationwide, something like a quarter of all communities have these. When you consider nationwide and considering even if it retains the data for minutes, you can figure out, I mean, you might not be motivated to do so, but you could figure out where someone has been and is going and track them over great distances with great detail.
right, and I think that's not. I think that is the issue, right? Because a flock initially, now you get different reports because it's what they admit to, what they kind of infer. Initially, they were retaining, as a matter of business practice, standard operating procedure, they would retain data for 30 days,
Yep.
whether you had committed a crime or not. So all this data comes in, they hold it for 30 days, which means that's a month that cops, surveillance agencies get to say, well, we're looking for patterns, we're looking for, whatever.
Looking for where this particular car was.
Right. And by extension, where you may have been for 30 days, what you may have done. Now, this comes at a time when, especially in the US, the government has become more and more intrusive, more and more surveillance state. We've seen it, right? Whether it's with ICE, whether it's with DHS, or just local law enforcement, the FBI, they seem to relish in this. We want to know where you are at all times. Last week, we touched on encryption technology. We touched on things of that nature, retaining privacy, our Fourth Amendment rights. So, Mike, I want to toss you a question because, as usual, I am in the uncomfortable position of playing devil's advocate against a position I myself hold. So I'll toss this out to you. Like, in this age of terrorists, in this age of the possibility of one or two people being able to cause much more harm to many more people than they could have in the past, right? With technology, with all these weapons of destruction. What's wrong with being able to track where people go? You see this in the UK a lot, right? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but in the UK, you see this a lot, right? Whenever you see one of their cop shows, it's always like, "Oh, there was a murder in the park." Okay, let's bring up all 5,000 cameras that we have on the street, the surveillance cameras, the public surveillance cameras, and let's see if we can follow the guy with the limp or in the trench coat, whatever. Now, granted, exaggerated, but the UK is well known for that, right? Especially London. They have cameras everywhere, facial recognition everywhere. What's wrong with that? Why
I
wouldn't we?
was just in London a few months ago, and I'm still getting letters from restaurants saying, "Why did you walk past us without coming in? We've got good food." Look, I think there's a there are a couple of problems. One is abuse. One, and we'll get into that. One is abuse. One is a lack of efficacy, and one is constitutionalism. And these are they sound like they overlap a lot. I think they're actually quite distinct. The abuse question has come up especially recently because dozens and dozens of cops nationwide, I think it was the Washington Post, seems to have a list of 50 cops who have used license plate reader databases to look up X's and currents and wish they were's, right? Basically to look up girls. And this is not what we want for a variety of reasons.
Right, and just to be clear, because
This is a form of stalking.
I was going to say you kind of disinfected it a little bit. You there have been documented cases of cops using flock and flock-like systems to stalk what they felt were hot women or their ex-wives or their ex-girlfriends, catalog their movements, then show up and say like, "Hey, what were you doing at Joe's house? You know, you're still with me or whatever." This it was really, aside from being illegal, it was creepy. And to think that an officer of the law is doing this, Mike, that on his own, he just said, "I'm going to
Right.
follow."
These are the kinds of behaviors that humans would do if they had access to the technology with which to do so. And cops being, unfortunately, as human as anyone else, and maybe slightly less human than some, I suppose. But cops being human end up doing these stupid things and illegal things and things even against the rules, right? There are specific. Never mind the legality. Clearly, even in cases where it's not per se illegal, it ought to be, right? But against training, I can tell you as a training officer, uh, we train officers not to do these things explicitly, like, you know, young 22-year-old new cop. In case you're wondering, right? I'm not going to sit here and explain everything in the world that's illegal. That's for the training academy. You can figure out, the criminal code. But specifically, let me tell you, don't be looking up the names, the license plates of people you know for any reason, whether you're stalking or you're just concerned about where your mother is. You can't do this. And this comes up in a lot more context than just license plate readers. We have people looking up driver's licenses, right? All kinds of issues, even old police records. We teach cops not to be doing this.
Right,
And
but let me just jump in here because I think the subtlety here is one that some people may miss, right? So, to your point, and I knew somebody back when I was right out of college, a friend of a friend worked at the FBI, and when we get together for, happy hour drinks or something once a week or whatever, he would brag. He'd say like, "Oh, you see that hot chick over there? I'm gonna get her number by the end of the day." And we're thinking, "Oh, what's he, smooth or something?" No, he was an FBI agent. So
he would just look it up.
he would just look it up and come back with her address or whatever, her phone number, and
Right.
to him, it was like a parlor trick. And maybe when you're 24, you kinda laugh at it, but here's the difference. The difference is those types of instances were, A, required human legwork to some extent. 2, when you got caught, there was no doubt about intent. It's like, "Oh, I was doing this to be a creep." You got fired on the spot, just like I think that guy was eventually. Um, and it required effort, it required time. Whereas now with these, uh, technologies like the flock systems, this becomes a press of a button, basically, right? Like, so somebody who is of mind to be abusive of this could be like, here's my I know my ex-wife's license plate number. I'm going to put it in. Not only am I doing a point in time, which I think is very key. It's not a point in time type of search. Like, let me see what her credit card bills are, which is bad enough. It's, I'm going to track every movement of hers.
I'm
Then,
going to ask for the appearances on the license plate reader. So it'll show you every place over the last 7 days, unless it has a 30-day retention policy. The system that you're using will tell you every place someone has been. My point is that the abuse happens, and it's in the news lately. The reason it's important is not merely these 50 idiots. And, if the Washington Post knows about 50, I'm sure there's 500 or 5,000, right? But it's not just a matter of these specific cases of idiocy. This is a much bigger issue than just stalking. This is a very small proportion of total stalking in the United States. This is not a stalking conversation. The reason this is important is because it is so easy to do that the government can do this on a much larger scale or for a much broader range of issues and motivations than just they're jealous of what some girl is doing or they wish that they knew what she was doing. It's much broader than that. It's, we don't like Martin Luther King,
hmm,
so we want to know where he has shown up at the same time and place as this other guy we don't like.
right. And in the political context, you could see very easily how that gets abused, right? So,
Just to add water, I mean, anyone listening to our conversation has already come up with 15 examples in their head. We don't even need to finish the paragraph, right? It just it is absolutely rife with opportunity for abuse by the government to track people, search people, figure out what they're doing, and then after the fact, draw their own conclusions. Law enforcement agencies draw their own conclusions about what it is that people are doing that might be illegal. This is backwards. This is not the way we want our criminal justice system to work. We want our criminal justice system to work in the form of when it comes to investigating individuals, a crime has been committed. We're trying to figure out who did it. Let's look at the likely suspects based on evidence surrounding the crime, not based on to whom we have access, right? Because it, for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is abuse, but abuse is category number one.
right, right. I'm sorry, before you get away from abuse, because I think we can, and very quickly, what you just described is also foundational, right, to the American justice system, right? Because as you were saying that, what literally popped into my head was Valenti Beria, who was Stalin's head of the secret police. And famously, he said, show me the man, then I'll find you the crime.
Absolutely. And I wanted to talk about constitutionalism last, but it's worth mentioning. I think if you allowed the government to maintain a database on everybody, the government would be able to make a case that this is a crime solving tool, right? And I think it's worth moving into the discussion of efficacy and cost benefit analysis. I want to quickly dispense with it because I don't think it should carry the day. In other words, if it were true, if it were true that the government could reduce crime by doing this, should we allow it to do it? I believe the answer is no, but we'll get to that. There is no evidence that suggests that this reduces crime.
Yeah, see, now I was going to get to that. That's so we moved from the abuse category, which you just very eloquently went into. Now let's get into the efficacy, and meaning, uh, does it work? I guess is the best way of describing it. Does this work? Now,
Well, it works for some things, but
right,
working for some things and reducing crime are two different things.
absolutely. So let me start with what it does, what Flock has been documented to do well. Stolen vehicle recovery, auto theft investigations, vehicle linked leads, These things, this is very effective for, and you can understand why, because these are issues related to vehicles, automobiles. So being able to track automobiles, you can understand. Oh, we can. Cleveland's closure rate, the city of Cleveland, closure rate increase went from 15.5% to 18.7%. Flocks
In a particular category, I
in
believe.
in the auto recovery and
Exactly,
things like that. So
right.
it did help there.
Not insignificant, but I would argue not enough to carry the whole argument,
No, no,
right?
creep. I'm trying to be.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I'm gonna comment on your data as we go so that we can wrap it up, but yeah.
The company's own research, Flock's sponsored research, claims a 9% increase in clearance rates of those types of crimes that I mentioned.
Yep.
And again, I'm willing to accept it because it sounds
And by
reasonable.
clearance rates, we mean figure out who did it.
Who did it, get a conviction, move on, or recover the property and things. So that's where it seems to be helpful, right? But in terms of how it does and what it's susceptible to. We've got a couple of cases. Let me just read these off to you, Mike, and you can talk to me about it because not only does it speak to efficacy, it also speaks to procedure and things of that nature. So, uh, um, there was one case. It's called the Brandon Upchurch case. The flock cameras misread the 7 on a license plate as a 2, the number 2, which produced a stolen plate alert, then got them to do an armed stop of the car, police dogs deployed. There was hospitalizations of the passengers involved. They were held and then ended up getting sued, and there was a $35,000 settlement to the victims. Flock, in a different case, the Hugo Parra case, Flock photographs a different red Alfa Romeo, and I'm reading this on purpose off a piece of paper, Mike. This is off not the top of my head. Police identified it as a fleeing suspect vehicle. An arrest followed. The person in the car spent nearly a month in jail, and then all the serious charges were dropped. And you see all these cases where the camera misread one character in the license plate. There was another case where it misread the character, uh, and it flagged what should have been a stolen motorcycle, and they attached that to like a family van. Ended up like terrorizing a mother and her kids, putting her causing distress. And then they say, "Well, oops, bad on us. We got the wrong number." And perhaps the biggest thing that in terms of efficacy that came out was the town of Roseville, California, reported 1,427 stolen vehicle or felony flock alerts. That's where the system itself says, "Hey, look out! This is what's happening in your area." For the years 2023 to 2024, the police department determined that 71% involved incorrectly read plates, and they canceled their contract, and they were but the silver lining here says none of those alerts were acted upon because their department policy was nobody acts on the alerts alone. The alerts only act, they use the alerts as a tip system, not necessarily as we got the alert, let's go grab them, like the previous cases we mentioned. So
Absolutely, and 71% sounds insanely high. There is something wrong. There's a technology problem that most communities don't have. And look, absolutely, these cameras make mistakes. By the way, so do police officers, right? It's not unusual to type in the wrong letter once in a while, the wrong state. Mistakes are made. There's another problem. To your point, those are all important examples. Uh, I once pulled over a car uh, necessarily at gunpoint. We figured it out quickly enough that I didn't have to point my gun at this woman, but she was driving her car that had been stolen and recovered, and someone didn't take it out of the system, right? Many, many times had I been involved with a recovered vehicle in which I told the driver, don't be driving this for half an hour. Like, give me a chance to get this out of the system because it's going to take a few minutes and then it has to stick, right? You drive down the street
Right.
And you're running the risk, even if there's not a license plate reader, some cop types in your license plate, it's still in the system as stolen. You're getting yanked out at gunpoint all over again.
Right. Especially, I would think, in smaller towns where there's fewer cars, so cops would be aware of a particular stolen vehicle, right?
Good point. Never mind reading the license plate. They're just looking for a blue Chevy, and you're going to have that problem. So, uh, that happens all the time. In this particular example, pulled over this woman, me and another cop at gunpoint as she was parking her car. Um, and you handle it gently because you've got an inkling, right? If you've been in a cop long enough, you've got an inkling that this, you know, this, uh, this doesn't seem like a stolen car in progress, right? It seems like someone going shopping. Is this your car? Yes, it is. Oh, do me a favor, put your hands on the top of the car. We're going to keep this safe, right? But these kinds of mistakes happen all the time. But in fairness, they happen without the technology. My point is that how do I say, the cost benefit analysis that communities go through is necessarily tight. This is not a slam dunk, right? Even if you didn't care a rat's ass about the Constitution. And plenty of politicians don't. They say they do, but they don't really understand the issues very well. So it only comes down to how much am I spending for these cameras? How much crime am I going to reduce? How many hours of police work am I going to save? That's the entire calculation. I think that's a crappy way to go about it. But my point is that even if that's all you cared about, it is not a slam dunk. You're not getting that much for the expenditure on these cameras. Now, you can send the signal to the community, we're making you safer. Maybe, you're going to dissuade a few people. If you're going to steal a car, let's not do it in this town. Let's go to the next town because one town has cameras, right? Uh, Perfectly logical. We don't have evidence that that happens yet, that that works. And without such evidence, you've got a cost benefit analysis that it, like I say, is not a slam dunk and certainly not in the category of, well, we understand there's big constitutional issues, but this is so good that we just can't live without. If if you're going to come to a libertarian like you or me, right, and say, look, we're going to have to compromise your community's constitutional values and rights and protections and separate the role of government from the community's interests. If you're going to compromise all that, but at least we're reducing crime by half. At least you're having a conversation, right?
Well, yeah, you and I might still.
When you tell me that you're boosting from 15 to 18% the clearance rate on a particular category of crime, it's like, oh my Lord, is this really what we're talking about?
Well, it's funny because in terms of how popular these things are right now, here in my county, New York, I thought it was hilarious and very predictable, actually. There was someone who decided that he didn't care for flock cameras, so he kind of snuck up behind one of them and just sprayed that expanding foam over it, like that
Yeah.
foam
I'm
and cut.
sorry, I shouldn't have laughed. Naughty. Shouldn't have done that.
Yeah, vandalism. They figured out who it was, they arrested him, and within minutes of that arrest being posted, there were about 300 people who said impossible. He was having dinner with me that night.
That is hysterical.
Literally, all these people saying that's impossible. He was having dinner at my house, like 40 miles away from
The
that
guy
guy.
had 300 dinners. It shows you how popular the cameras are.
That's my point, right? Like, I'm wondering, and I didn't see any
Well,
poll.
that brings up a whole fourth category that I hadn't suggested earlier is the politics of this.
Right, and the politics. Maybe we talk about that before the constitutionality, but the politics of it right now, Mike, is other than very hardcore, and I mean hardcore guys who think they're law and order, I don't see this really having that much of a popular. I don't see the push behind it, Mike, to be honest with you. Even in high crime areas, nobody's like, well, I want to know. I enjoy the cops knowing what I'm doing every minute of every day. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Well, look, if if you've been victimized by bad data, if you've been told this is going to reduce crime, a lot of people in the community who have better things to do than think about the Constitution every waking moment, like you and I do. If you've got better things to think about, and your mayor says it's not going to cost that much money, but it is going to reduce crime, I think a lot of people are like, "Well, go for it. What do I care? I'm not doing anything wrong." And and most people who do think about it come to the conclusion that that's not a good idea. Now, interestingly, perhaps fascinatingly, the Trump administration is all about this. The Trump administration is weighing in on the side. There's an important court case in Norfolk. There have been other important court cases. The Trump administration has weighed in on the side of the state, um, no matter what state that is, but weighed in on the side of government having more authority. One might argue, one might guess, one might figure that the reason is because the Trump administration wants to use these access to these cameras, not buy them itself, but have access to them through local agencies in order to enforce immigration law, without a doubt, right? It's got to be one of the big motivations. I wish that they would think through the issues a little bit more uh, deeply. I'm a big believer in law enforcement. Wouldn't have been a cop for 11 and a half years if it were otherwise. And I should probably admit, I do believe that immigration law should be enforced. If you're in the United States illegally, then, I think you got to go. Now, maybe I believe that the law should be tweaked. I think that there are different ways to handle this than ICE has been. And as a training officer, I recognize that ICE officers' ability to act like local cops is horrific. They need not just more training, but I would argue an order of magnitude, at least twice as much training as they've already got. They're really bad at what they do. Having said all of that, I wish that the Trump administration would think through these constitutional issues. As a matter of politics, I think they're on the wrong side. Just politically, I think they're on the wrong side constitutionally and in terms of efficacy, but I think that they're on the wrong side politically. So many folks who supported President Trump did so, and many continue to do so, because they viewed him as anti-establishment, anti-state, right?
Drain the swamp, Mike.
Drain the swamp. Well, this is a swamp tool. This is a swamp tool. And I think a lot of people are disappointed with the idea that the Trump administration would back police having unfettered access to prolonged databases.
Well, and I think, first of all, I'll throw in my commentary. This is no surprise. I mean, obviously, the Trump administration was a big proponent of all the FISA reauthorizations and everything. So, and they were very clear about it because when it came down to a single vote, President Trump picked up the phone, called up Mike Johnson, and said, you, Mike Johnson, are the tie-breaking vote, and you're voting for reauthorization, which he did. So it comes as no surprise that the administration would be a proponent of something like these flock cameras. Now, in the interest of being fair to all parties involved, Flock says it has no federal contracts. It has no contracts with ICE specifically.
Right. And it doesn't, but these, the federal agencies, plural, want access and get access.
From the local people do have, like, so the municipalities that have these flock are not prevented from taking that information and passing it along to the federal government. So it's that sort of, bending the rules type of thing, which true, ICE has no direct access, but it could just pick up the phone to a friendly municipality and say, like probably in Texas somewhere, and say, "Hey, what do you guys got?" You know,
Absolutely, nothing precludes them from doing so, and Flock doesn't have rules against it either. To Flock's credit, they have been smart, politically smart, in imposing their own rules, right? Their default is now, I want to say a 7-day
right?
retention
It was
instead of
initially
30.
right. It was initially 30. They knocked it down to 7 when they
Yep.
started feeling
You could expand it to 30, but you'd have to override the Flock default. And
So
Flock also,
I'm
go
sorry, they
ahead.
have something called an investigative hold. So if they know that there was a crime committed and the data's being used,
Exactly. I
uh,
was going to get to that.
yeah,
There
okay,
are three different issues with Flock. One is the retention period, as well as the sharing. You've also got Flock has a rule now that says a cop has to enter in the reason for the search, and apparently the drop down menu no longer includes I'm curious what my ex is doing, or I saw a hot girl in the corner, right? That's not part of the drop down menu. You have to actually name a crime, and the reason to do the search. And then the the other issue is what constitutes a hit. What it is that is required to match, and how that is handled, how a record is created, and this becomes a part of Flock's rules. And I say good for Flock for doing it, but they've only done it because communities have been a little bit slow to take matters into their own hands, and Flock recognizes that they have a political issue here.
right. They're trying to navigate it. Look, they're a corporation. They have a fiduciary obligation to their shareholders to maximize profit. So I guess we shouldn't be on their case. They're trying to turn a profit. They're trying to maximize their contract, the number of contracts, and all that. So, but it does kind of bring up a philosophical question, which was, okay, why good, like you said, good on them for amending their policies, with retention periods and requirements, and why weren't they in place to begin with? And having said that, should there be laws specifically around retention of data rather than waiting for test cases to come up almost always to the Supreme Court, right? So, and just to frame it, Mike, and I know I'm talking too much, but let me just frame this. We kind of went through this with cell phone data, right? Like that, there was warrantless spying, warrantless surveillance. There it is, but it's at the metadata level. Like somehow they drew a distinction that said, okay, we could gather anonymous cell phone data for all of New York City if we had to, but we couldn't capture Big John's cell phone data specifically without a warrant. But since my data is in that metadata, and if you're a good enough data scientist, you'll figure it out without the warrant anyway, right? So there is this precedence if you kind of make an analogy to cell phone data, right? But in this particular case, it seems to be a lot easier to make that leap from anonymous metadata to, oh, Mike was driving his blue pickup truck to, from point A to point B.
Yeah. And I think now we're finally getting to what the real issue is. Eh, Because I believe the real issue is the constitutionality of it. What the courts have seemed to have adopted is an attitude that suggests that the technology changes the constitutional issues. And I think that that's wrong. The courts seem to believe that we're getting into constitutional hot water with long retention periods, an ability to put two and two together to get four instead of to only get three, right? Being able to track someone, the issue of um, what gets retained long term. To the point you were going to make earlier is that Flock has this method of if you flag a certain license plate, it'll retain it indefinitely for you. That information, that data, and that all these bells and whistles, all these capabilities together are what create the constitutional problem. And I don't think so. I think that that is an incorrect way to look at it if you're standing on the Constitution. If you're just a politician, whether at the state level or the federal level or a local mayor, I get it. But from a constitutional point of view, the technology does not change the underlying constitutional limits. We need to remember that the Constitution is what gives the government power and authority. In the absence of the Constitution saying you can do it, you can't, right? We need to stop our government from filling in the cracks with its own authority. As an example, take away all of the technology and imagine in Boston 250 years ago, a young attorney, John Adams, is writing down notes regarding what people are doing downtown. And he, wraps himself in the cloak of, well, I'm preventing crime. And he just runs around writing everybody down. I'm pretty sure if his friend Thomas Jefferson saw that, he would be saying, what are you doing, creepy old attorney guy, right? What are you doing? Stop it. Cut it out. If, if you're do, if you're doing this on the company dime, if you're doing this with constitutional Congress money, continental Congress money, that's a violation. You really need to stop this. This is the Alien and Sedition Act on not on steroids, but writ small. This is an example of something that just is creepy. They couldn't imagine the technology brought to bear today, but the constitutional issue is still the same. And for this reason, I believe that the solution needs to go further upstream, not downstream of technology. The way that we should be looking at this is, should we allow our government to be maintaining data on us at all of any kind for any period of time? Whether it's facial recognition, right, at the airport, whether it's cell phone metadata, or anything else. And I think the answer should be no. We should not allow the government to do this. And I think that the way that we should be allowing license plate readers to work, whether automated cameras or, frankly, officers riding down Hallandale Beach Boulevard, I think that they should only be allowed to match yes or no. The license plate you just observed is in the database of things that you are looking for legitimately, or it's not. In other words, I believe it should be incumbent upon the government to say in advance, these are the license plates we're looking for specific reasons, right? This one was stolen. This was involved in a crime. That's the database that it's allowed to keep. 1/1000th of the size of the database they want to keep. And then a license plate reader reads license plates and attempts to match against that database. If you read if you're a machine, if you're a camera, and you read the license plate and it does not match something on the government's sought database, no record is created. That's right. It is not saved at all. It is only saved long enough to look for the match. And if there is no match, then Thomas Jefferson says to John Adams, stop it, that's creepy. You're not writing it down. We're not going to have a discussion about retention periods and what you're going to do with the data after the fact. Don't even write it down. You're allowed to stand in the corner and look. And that, by the way, even that's a little creepy. But that's it. You don't get to write it down. And I think that is the only constitutionally defensible position in the long run.
Right.
I'm a little uncomfortable with this idea that it only becomes a constitutional problem when the technology gets really good.
Mm. That's a great point because the same proponents, and I know I'm generalizing here, so forgive me. The same people who will say I'm a big 2A supporter when they get the argument, well, they only had muskets when they wrote that amendment. They didn't have Uzi machine guns. They didn't have nuclear weapons. What's a good 2A supporter always say? That's not the point. The weapon itself isn't the issue, right? The underlying issue is the ability to defend yourself against a tyrannical government.
Right.
Same thing applies to the Fourth Amendment, though. Apply that same logic to the Fourth Amendment, right? Like, just because you're trying to protect me doesn't give you the right to do illegal searches or warrantless searches. At least give me the courtesy, do me the courtesy of going through the pretense of obtaining a warrant, just like with the FISA courts, right?
Right.
Like,
And hopefully it's a little bit more robust than the FISA courts, but I get your point. Absolutely. Or even at the very least, name the sorry, that was my cat, my wife's cat, to be clear. Um, I beg your pardon. At least require law enforcement to write down the tags that it is looking for cause, for a reason, right? And if you're looking for something beyond just the immediate imagery, you need to get a warrant. There's uh, I just don't see a defensible position that compromises that successfully in the long run.
okay. Yep. No, I agree. It really does have to move away from. And Mike, I don't know. Let me ask you this: do you feel heartened that some of this pushback that local precincts, I shouldn't say precincts, local police departments are starting to provide, at least in large swaths of the country, where they're like, we don't want the headache. This is not A, worth the expense, B, worth
The politics.
the politics of it. And I think there was one town in Florida in specific where the sheriff came out and said, I still believe in the Constitution. We're not renewing this flock contract
I
at all.
think it is heartening. My problem is that I worry that if we make that argument based on how good or how not good or how expensive it is, that that position can be eroded over time, right? That the company will come back 2 years later and say, well, now it's cheaper. Now it works even better. Now we can really reduce crime.
Or now there's a new sheriff.
Or now there's a new sheriff. Good point. New sheriff in town, and she likes more technology. Look, one of the reasons we need to be so protective of the Constitution, one of the reasons why we need to be so protective of our individual liberties, is because we are running this experiment that we call American democracy. And you're not running the right experiment. You're screwing up my test if you keep compromising. What we're trying to test is, if we maintain a constitution and limit government powers, can we get rich and succeed? And so far, we've gotten richer than other places, and we've succeeded more than other places because we've done a better job of adhering to our constitution.
Correct.
If we keep compromising and getting further and further down the road, farther from the constitution, then you're not actually running the test anymore. And I believe that there is such value in running the test. First of all, I believe that we will continue to be successful. The test will be positive. We will be successful based on adherence to the Constitution. I'm convinced of this. But there's another aspect, and that's the test, the demonstration effect. The reason the test is important to humanity is to demonstrate to the rest of the world that this works. If you don't try it, right? If you don't try constitutionalism, then we don't have the demonstration. And the demonstration is important. We need to teach that this works. You've got millions, dozens of millions of French people trapped in the nation of France. I know I'm picking on them and it's politically incorrect, but I need to today. Trapped in the nation of France, right? Wondering, will American constitutionalism work? And we need to demonstrate that it does, that you don't have to compromise and give your government all kinds of crazy authority in order to fight crime, get along with each other, right? That you can protect privacy and maintain that line against what I would call extra constitutional authority. and be successful and be happy and be stinking rich.
Yeah, I mean, it is that old hack line of America being a beacon for the rest of the world, like, I mean, that's basically what you just said, and it's something worth agreeing, like, you have to live your gimmick, and our gimmick is our Constitution, and to be able to live it and to show people like, "Hey, it works," and, tangentially, it's kinda like what you hear with this rising popularity, as it always does every 25 years or so, of the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America, or whatever. Well, they'll say, well, look at all that's wrong in this country. It's not perfect. And my first response is, okay, but how do we get to this point where everything's not perfect? Where your comment is everything's not perfect instead of everything stinks, everything sucks, which
Right.
where we were prior to this experiment.
Compared to 100 years ago, it looks pretty damn good.
Yeah, and by the way, not just internal comparisons of American history, I'm talking about global history and the history of humanity.
Pick
Whether
any
it's
point in time, we look pretty good.
right,
Compared to the rest of the world right now, we look pretty good.
right. So the question always is, and I know you've said this a lot, and I still think it's true what you said, which is, this is a battle between whether or not this works. By this, I mean our liberal form of government, not liberal in the political sense, but liberal in the philosophical sense,
Classically liberal, right.
classically liberal sense of tolerance and individual liberty and restraint restrained government.
Yep.
And yeah, and I think this is again one of those nice cases that kind of encapsulates it, Mike. We went from flock cameras to preserving the Constitution, and honestly, I don't think it's that much of a leap because, as you said, the current administration really relishes in pushing the envelope of what it is they can do. I mean, you brought up a great point. It's not that um, the Constitution tells you what government can do. It basically tells you government can do nothing
Right. It's a
except
government of delimited powers, not a
except
government of merely limited powers.
enumerated powers. It's it's very
This is what you can do, and that's it.
that's it. The assumption is in the opposite direction. It's not like with a king. Assume the king can do anything until he can't. It's the opposite here. Assume the government can do nothing unless and the current administration, not just the current one, but the current one seems to take great relish in doing this. Is let's push this and push this and push this until we are told to stop, and even then we'll figure out it's a coin flip as to whether or not we'll stop. And
The
with
last few administrations have been like that,
absolutely,
ever
absolutely.
since the second Obama administration.
Oh, sure, sure,
Yeah.
sure,
So
sure.
that's at least 3 4-year terms.
Without a doubt. I just view the current administration as really they're not even pretending to have any sort of hesitation about it. Obama would occasionally try to smooth talk his way out of it, like Mac Daddy his way out of it.
Being a
President,
constitutional attorney,
yeah, try to do something, like the President Trump just doesn't care. He's like, yeah, I want to do this, and I have a feeling it'll work, and it doesn't matter. And with the flock,
limited by his own morals.
right, which I don't think it's us being
That's
negative.
his line.
That's his statement.
That's his line.
Yeah, I'm limited by my own whatever he said, integrity or morals, whatever.
Morals. He said
Well,
he's limited by his own morals.
there you go, which is great coming from a New York real estate developer. But anyway,
You could be the most ethical guy in the world if you believe in a democratic republic and a government of delimited powers. You've got to believe that there's a more important authority than your own morals,
your own
because your own morals should be a deference to the Constitution.
Mike, if this does reach the Supreme Court, which I'm sure it will at some point, especially if flock cameras are indirectly used via local authorities to support ICE actions, expanded ICE actions, among others. But I think ICE is the headline one, right?
Sure, sure,
You-
sure.
and it ends up at the Supreme Court
Yeah, but piggybacking on ICE's authority will be the NSA and the CIA
and the
and the
DHS,
FBI.
all of them, right? It's just
Right,
that
they'll all be cheering for ICE in that Supreme Court hearing.
ICE is the headline one, but you're absolutely right. There's no distinction once one federal agency gets that sort
Right,
of foot in
right,
the door.
right.
Um, like, how do you see the Supreme Court ruling? Do you see it along the lines of the cell data and the phone data?
Yes, I think the Supreme Court comes down on the side of let the government do it as long as it doesn't go too far and as long as, technology doesn't progress too far yet.
Think it stops at the anonymization of that data, or by definition, is this data not anonymizable? Meaning that a license, how do you anonymize a
Yeah,
license?
yeah, yeah. I think the Supreme Court will allow states to, uh, keep certain amounts of data. The Supreme Court will be, as it has been recently, all too deferential to state law and allow these agencies to do pretty much what they want. They'll probably say no, you can't keep it forever. You can't build profiles of what innocent people are doing. There'll be rules, but the Supreme Court will demonstrate once again. I choose my words carefully. The Supreme Court will demonstrate once again that it's not that conservative, that it defers to executive authority. It defers to government power, and it does so on a regular basis. I believe it will again.
And that's a sad statement as well, and perhaps another episode. All right, Mike. I think this was a very interesting episode, but let's close it on this. First of all, uh, I hear you're running for office. Tell us about that, and tell us about how people can get on board. Maybe any
Go
events.
to MikeTremont.com, which
Yes.
is hard to spell, but it's got two A's in Tremont. You go to Mike, TERMAAT.com, and sign up for the email, or, if you give me $1 donation, I will email you and thank you. Interestingly, I'm not going to send any more elaborate an email for $1 million donation than for a dollar donation. You're going to get the email either way. But having said that, perhaps more interest that's marginally interesting. Perhaps more interesting, going to Dallas. The Republican National Committee is having a convention. Hold on, convention, right? With delegates. uh, well, they are delegates. Just because they're buying their way in doesn't mean that they're not delegates, but they're not, the elected delegates that we're used to at a national convention. This is a very different type of meeting than we're used to from the major parties having a national convention. This isn't one that's taking care of nomination business or anything like that. It's according to the RNC itself, it's a Trumpapalooza, or maybe it's Trump Palooza. I don't know how many syllables in there, but it's a rah rah for the Republican Party, which I think is terrific. It's a rah rah for the administration, which could be a little problematic because I don't think the administration is helping us out very much politically lately. I think a lot of local races are struggling to overcome some of the negative perceptions of the administration. So that's a bit of a challenge. But I'm going to Dallas. We're going to have a breakfast on the 10th, on September 10. The RNC meeting is September 9 and 10. But in Dallas, we're having a breakfast. Check us out. Email me at mike@miketremont.com, and I can set you up for that if folks are coming into Dallas. That's going to be a lot of fun. I will be there. The Republican Liberty Caucus of Texas is sponsoring it, so they will be there. So even if you found Mike Tremont the most boring thing in the world, as some people do, I hear, but more interestingly, there'll be representatives there from the Republican Liberty Caucus of Texas, and those guys are terrific. And we're going to have a good time, 8 to 10 at Macero's Mexican restaurant in Dallas on September 10th.
Fantastic. September 9th and 10th is the meeting, right?
Yep. And we figure that people will be bored of the meeting by the morning of the second day, and they'll want a free breakfast. If you're a delegate, come on over for a free breakfast. I don't know if I mentioned that the price is right. It's a free breakfast, but you got to register in advance.
All right. So if you're in town that weekend in Dallas, stop by, say hi to Mike. And by the way, he'll talk to you. He'll say hi and a lot more as I find out when I'm
Probably too much. You'll be like, Mike, leave me alone. I'm eating breakfast.
All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us on Liberty Lens. Do us a favor, hit like, hit subscribe, helps us out with the algorithm. We really appreciate your support in that manner. Until next time, when I'm joined once again by Mike Dermott, this is Big John. Peace, everyone.